Hi, everyone. I'm here with Hector Oseguera, who is running in New Jersey's 8th Congressional District against incumbent Albio Sires, and the primary is on July 7th. Thank you very much for being with me. I looked at your platform a little bit. It's fairly progressive. It's sort of what you'd expect for somebody who volunteered for Warren back in the day, then volunteered for Bernie in 2016, and then AOC after that. So you come from your evolution through progressive politics, I think, is one that we see in a lot of people our age. Um, can you tell me a little bit about your background and what inspired you to run?
Sure. So I was born in this district. I was born in Hoboken, New Jersey, and raised here my entire life. And unfortunately, things have just been moving in the wrong direction essentially my entire life. So my primary opponent, Albio Sires, was my hometown mayor when I was a kid. He was the mayor of West New York, which is my hometown.
Named
And
because it's right across from
yeah,
from the city.
Yeah, yeah, West New York, literally, because it's
Yep.
west of New York City. And so I've basically been aware of the political machine here in New Jersey my entire life. Um, I come from a working class background. My mother is a teacher. My father is kind of like the father in that show, Everybody Hates Chris, where like he basically had a different job every other week, trying to like, just put food on the table, do whatever he could to, send me to school with a couple dollars to buy lunch and stuff like that. So it's like we always kind of were struggling, or it's basically your immigrant story: come to America, work hard, try to provide a good lifestyle for your kids. My parents always told me the path to a middle class life was through education. They always stressed to do good in school. I did as good as I could. I went to BU, then I went to law school, and that's how I sort of landed in my career, which is in anti-money laundering. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years. And really, what brought me into trying to run for office is that I feel like Trump's election sort of like radicalized a lot of people. And like prior to Trump's election, like I was your regular neoliberal centrist Democratic voter. Like I was like, as long as we got a Democrat, like that's good enough for me. And when Clinton lost to Trump, I just started doing a lot of research into my own representatives, and I kept finding things that I did not like. I'll just share two quick stories that I like to tell a lot. Is that a group of activists went to my opponent's offices, uh, not asking him, this is at the height of the detention center crisis, not asking him, will you abolish ICE, which was very popular at the time, but just asking if he would vote to cut funding to ICE, right? And a member of his staff said he will never vote to cut funding to ICE, and ICE does great work, is what he says. And this is a district that is predominantly Hispanic. So I just thought that that was
53%,
like,
right?
yeah,
Something like that.
54%. Yeah, a majority Hispanic. So I just thought it was like basically like political malpractice for somebody to say something like that to a predominantly Hispanic community. I thought it was like disgusting. The fact of the matter is that he came to this country as a Cuban refugee himself. So one would think that he would have sympathy for people who were caught up in this very abusive and very draconian Trump immigration system. But the fact of the matter is that the political machine here in New Jersey is very conservative when it comes to immigration. The county government, it's all like one big cesspool, right? So the county officials work with the federal officials, and they all sort of are buddy buddy, and they make a lot of money off of the for-profit ICE detention contracts that they have. So obviously, he's not going to do anything to mess up the money that the county's making. A lot of people have spoken to the county government and said, like this immigration thing is like really bad, and the people here are not for it. Like, why do you keep renewing these contracts? And they're like, well, we just make so much money off the contracts, we'll never vote against them. And in fact, one of the freeholders, and that's like the local government, the county government officials, he was like he was kicked out of the machine basically because he wouldn't sign the ICE contract sight unseen. So that's like story number one. Story number two is that I don't know if the name Elliot Abrams rings a bell to you, but for those who are not familiar, he was responsible for funding what we would very generously call right-wing death squads in Latin America throughout the 80s for the Reagan administration. He is currently the Trump administration's ambassador for regime change to Venezuela, and recently, or like last year, had a very testy exchange with Ilhan Omar when he went to testify on the Hill. And on the very same day, my opponent takes a picture with this guy, basically like buddy buddy, very friendly, with a man who is a war criminal, who was convicted for lying to Congress in Iran-Contra, and who absolutely is not the type of person that the people in this district would stand with in an ideological sense. And as a matter of fact, like, this district used to be predominantly Cuban, but recently has become more Central American. And a lot of the people who are here now probably came fleeing the violence that someone like Elliot Abrams was perpetuating across Latin America.
So, so the reason that we are having this interview is because we connected over Twitter. I mentioned that I tweeted something like, "We don't have a left-wing party," and you responded that we're working on it. And you are one of several progressives, who, congressional candidates who are coming up, who I've spoken to, and there is this hopeful edge that all of you seem to have, that we can reform it. And I wanted to ask you, because 2020 promises to be a bad year for progressives, just in light of COVID. I know that, I'm sure that you're experiencing some of this too, with the how the crisis has affected your campaign and your ability to get boots on the ground kind of people out there, and but you're still doing it. You're still out there. You're still running. I wanted to ask, what do you say to progressives who feel like they don't have a political party? They don't fit anymore.
Well, they're right. They don't, right? Because as a matter of fact, this is something I say often, is like, we are really stuck in this like Cold War mentality over what politics looks like. And people think that the Republicans are right and the Democrats are left, right? But we don't have two parties in the system. We have one party in America, and it's the business party. And both Republicans and Democrats pay homage to that one party system when it comes to Wall Street, when it comes to foreign intervention, when it comes to policy in general. The Republicans and Democrats do this WWF thing where they like hate each other in public, but then they go behind closed doors and then they literally agree on everything, right? And I really don't, I don't voter shame, and I don't shame anybody who feels left out and so goes to a third party. But the fact of the matter is that in America, only one of two parties will be elected, right? If you were going into a boxing match and somebody said you can only box if you'll tie one arm behind your back and tie both your legs together, you would say that's not a fair fight. But that's essentially what it looks like if you're trying to go through a third party. Like honestly, I'll just say it, like, a third party will not be elected federally. There is no third party candidate in any federal office. The closest it comes is Bernie Sanders, and he's an independent. He's not a third party, right? So it's like no party. So the only real way to get reform is to get within the major parties and change them from within. And that's what I think the squad has done a really good job at. AOC got into a lot of trouble saying that, like, in a real world, her and Joe Biden would not be in the same party. And that's absolutely true. Like, in a lot of ways, Joe Biden fits closer to a centrist party. That, Joe Biden is closer to Jeb Bush than he is to AOC when it comes to policy.
A lot
And
closer.
so, yeah, a lot closer. It's not even close. So it's just like, if you want to have a progressive party, we have to elect people, number one. And the reality of America today is that only somebody in one of the two major parties is going to be elected. So the best chance that we really have is to run candidates who can win running within one of the two major parties. Like, look at AOC's district, look at my district. Like, this is the bluest of blue districts. A lot of people will say, you know, like, why would we risk like losing a blue seat on you and not be sure, right? But if you look at my opponent, if you look at him, like his immigration policy, he takes corporate PAC money, like he's basically a Republican. Like, if in a district as blue as mine, why shouldn't we be getting something out of being such a blue district? I often say that I feel like people in America, we're in an abusive relationship with our political system where like we get the bare minimum and are told to be happy with it. And people like me, people like the squad, all these progressive candidates are saying, listen, we don't have to accept what we're given. We can actually fight for more and fight for better. And it's like more realistic to, you know, try to reform the major parties from within than to try to get into an uneven fight starting a brand new party.
So do you think that the Democratic Party today you don't think the Democratic Party today represents people like your dad? Like people who
Hell
like
no.
cab drivers or I watched another interview with you and you were talking, just going over some of the things that he did and, you know, driving cabs and you said basically any blue collar job you can imagine.
Yeah.
But you don't think that there's that in America today?
Absolutely not. And like I said, it's really more of an abusive relationship where the Democrats are like, well, at least we're not racist, so like vote for me, right? And that's and I really want, like, I wish the DNC would listen to the fact that that's not good enough. Like, saying I'm not as bad as the other guy is not a winning strategy. A winning strategy is actually giving the people something that they can believe in and fight for. And that's what I think all of us progressive candidates are trying to do, is to tell people, like, I'm not telling you I'm less bad than the other guy. I'm saying I'm doing what you would want. I truly want to represent you, not this like elite class of donors who will write a $10,000 check or like will give you endless streams of money and then will have you sell out the people that you represent.
So let me ask you, does it make it harder for you? Let's say you win the primary. Does it make it harder for you to run with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket?
Not really. I would not say so. Again, the fact of the matter is, like, especially in New Jersey, because New Jersey is like kind of unique, and it's like
Maybe a
a
dumb
one
question
party.
because you're in a very blue district.
Yeah,
So it
I'm in
wouldn't
a
hurt you.
hyper blue district, a hyper blue state.
It wouldn't hurt you at the. So let me ask you this then. Let me rephrase the question. Would it make it more difficult for you ideologically to run with a Joe Biden at the top of the ticket who's promising to entrench? I mean, Biden says that his candidacy is a bridge to the future, but the future that he envisions is, bringing in the Mayor Petes of the party and entrenching those folks. The Kamala Harris is the Mayor Petes. Do you think that is at? Do you find that is at odds with the campaign that you are trying to run today?
It definitely is, but what I'll say is that I think that Joe Biden is trying to run the safest campaign he can and is really running a centrist campaign, right? And I'm obviously a lot more progressive than that. So I think, obviously I don't want Trump reelected, right? So we only really have, again, going back to like, it's basically a binary choice. Like, you either get Trump or something else. And I'll literally vote for anything other than Trump, right? Like, so obviously I have severe ideological differences with Joe Biden, but I would prefer to be holding Joe Biden's feet to the fire than Trump's feet to the fire, because at least with a Joe Biden, I have somebody who is at least going to listen to the critiques, whereas Trump is probably going to go on a Twitter tirade and like just complain or like say something ridiculous. So yeah, obviously, like, I'm not a centrist. I'm not running a safe campaign to like try to like pull in moderate Republicans into my campaign. That's not what I'm doing.
Right. For those watching, he's running on a Green New Deal and Medicare for all and a number of other very progressive policies, including let's say major changes to America's immigration system.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, So obviously I don't want to be, and I don't see myself as part of the Democratic establishment. In fact, in a lot of ways, what this campaign is doing is actively fighting against the Democratic establishment. But I would find it a lot easier to reform, and obviously that's why I'm running as a Democrat. I find it a lot easier to reform the Democratic establishment than to try to get Republicans to see the light of day.
So let me ask you. One of the things that a lot of progressive candidates did back in 2018 was sort of suggest that they would not be supportive of Nancy Pelosi for Speaker. But then when push came to shove and the time came, and it was Nancy Pelosi or Tim Ryan, the progressive wing didn't put up a challenger and ended up falling in line behind Pelosi. And today, we've seen sort of time and again, we've seen the result of that. The Democrats gave Donald Trump a larger defense budget than Paul Ryan gave him. They did not include any strings attached to prevent him from using some of that money for the wall. They did not include any checks on ICE concentration camps at the border. They did not include any war powers checks. And recently they approved a sweeping surveillance package for Trump to expand his surveillance powers.
Oh yeah.
And now we have the HEROES Act, which is the second
Yep.
stimulus package that they're putting together, and we've seen some of the provisions in that. The relief for rent is heavily means tested and somewhat arbitrary. I think if you read through it, it says you have to be below 80% of the median income of the area based on a determination by the Secretary of. So it's very means tested, and inserted into that legislative package is also cuts to pensions for essential workers, lift the SALT cap, so
Yep.
wealthy people can donate more money to charity, I guess, but they get a bigger tax write-off, and then a provision that allows political nonprofits access to relief funds. So with all of these compounding I guess levels of failure to one, check the Trump administration, and to two, put up an ideological counter to him. Do you think that Pelosi is doing her job well, and would you support her if you got elected for another term as Speaker?
I mean, that's a really good question because, like, at the end of the day, you have to be a coalition. So, what I see myself as is I will be the progressive firebrand, right? Like, I think that AOC and the squad in general, they get to step out ahead of Pelosi and kind of will drag the party to the left, right? So, I guess it would be a good question to see who's running for speakership in 2021 to see who I could support, right? I would love AOC for speaker, right? Like that would be great. But I don't know who's going to be up there. Um it's kind of like a hard question to answer because obviously I share all your critiques of like the military budget, the USA Freedom Act, which I was like skewering my opponent on just yesterday because he was a vote for to let the FBI wiretap your browser history as well. I'm completely against the surveillance state. So obviously I have a lot of critiques, but sometimes you're trying to keep the house together. And I don't know. I don't know. I would have to see what candidates are running for speakership in 2021. I would also have to obviously, I will never vote for the surveillance state. I will never vote for the military industrial complex. I will never vote for the political elites and the corporate PAC money donors. I will never, ever vote for these people. So again, but this is the thing is that I feel like this is the way that the right has gotten so much traction since the Reagan era is like this very minute shifting of the Overton window ever so slightly, year after year, year after year. And then you end up with Trump as the president who is like in a normal reality is like a far, far, far right winger, right? So maybe Pelosi is like the cover to shifting because she's seen as a centrist. Maybe she can be a vehicle for progressives to introduce legislation and introduce initiatives like the Green New Deal, like Medicare for All, that again begin to shift that Overton window to the left ever so slightly, ever so slightly, ever so slightly, so that maybe in 4, 8, a couple of cycles, we end up with a very, very, very progressive Congress or a very progressive president.
So that makes sense to me, but it doesn't. It also doesn't seem to me that Pelosi has any intention of letting Medicare for All ever come to a vote. It doesn't seem like she has any intention of. I mean, it's just in terms of, and I'd like to just say this is if she wins, right? She is facing. She's facing a challenge right now, a general election challenger named Shahid Buttar, who is a progressive. So we don't know what's going to happen. But again, 2020 does not look like a great year for the left, simply because.
I disagree. I totally disagree.
Well, okay, so wait, let's talk about that, because the other candidates I've talked to have said our ground game has been cut severely. Our ability to organize has moved entirely online, which on the one hand is good because everybody's online and the left is sort of very savvy about that. But at the same time, nothing really can substitute making direct voter contact, as I'm sure you're aware. So how has your campaign adapted?
So honestly, in this Corona world, under normal circumstances, there's this very severe power disparity between challengers like myself and incumbents who have political organization and have a ton of money. So they can do things that we can't. In this COVID world, I honestly believe that power disparity has been leveled off because they are in the same position as us, right? Now, I'll even take it one step further to say that they may be in a weaker position than us, specifically when you look at my race, because my opponent is not tech savvy whatsoever. If your listeners go to albiosires.com, they will find themselves at my donation page. My opponent has absolutely no digital game. His social media presence is absolutely pathetic. He has no presence in the district. He's well known amongst what we call machine people, the regular establishment voters. If you take one step outside of that to the normal everyday man and woman, they have no idea who he is. So like before Corona hit bad, I was going door to door canvassing, and the first question I would ask people is, do you know the name of our congressman? 80% of the people I asked had no idea who he was. And of the people who did know who he was, at least half, if not more, were like part of the local machinery. So of course they know who he is, right? So again, in at a time like this, I really don't think that the incumbents have the power disparity that they would have under normal circumstances. We've switched to a completely digital voter outreach. So we're heavy on the online ads. We're heavy on the emails. We're heavy in the phone banking. And yeah, obviously nothing really substitutes for that one-on-one person-to-person interaction. I completely agree, but the machine can't do that either. So, and now in New Jersey, today the governor announced that we're gonna go to a predominantly vote by mail primary, which again has the effect of benefiting me by far because we expect the voter turnout to be a lot higher. The local machine had been fighting with Governor Murphy against going to vote by mail because they need low turnout to perpetuate their power. They need a very, very low voter turnout because they know that only their loyal voters will turn out regularly. In a world, I've gotten so many DMs of people once Governor Murphy made the announcement, basically saying like, you just won your election, right? Because people expect that now that it's easier for people to vote, more people will do it. And that has the effect of bringing out a ton of people who normally might not have gone to vote in a primary, but now have a reason to. On top of the fact that essentially like the presidential race is over, there's only one candidate. So the people who might be loyal Joe Biden voters, probably don't see a reason to turn out as strongly as they might have because Joe Biden's already the nominee. So only the people who are enthusiastic about this race have a reason to turn in their ballot, and that is overwhelmingly going to be people who want change and are down to vote for a progressive like myself.
That is the most optimistic answer I have heard from any candidate who I've talked to this yet. Um, that all sounds very good. Incumbent advantage is something it's tricky, right? Like it's not always constant, but you do expect there to be some. I think you're correct me if I'm wrong, but you are also a poli sci
Yeah.
grad. So I'm sure I did government at my college, which was what we called political science, and something that we always hammered on was the the sort of mercurial nature of incumbent advantage. So that's good. That's very that's good news. How are you holding up? Like just personally, I mean, obviously that's if the it hasn't affected your campaign to or crippled your optimism. How has coronavirus affected you, and how are you staying sane?
I mean, I gotta say, I'm luckier than most because I get to work from home. I still have a job. I don't really have a lot to complain about. So I'm doing pretty well. I'm very privileged compared to a lot of other people in this world who find themselves with job insecurity, with housing insecurity, with food insecurity. And those are things that I really worry about. And so what really has kept me strong is the love of my community, the love for the people who desperately need somebody to be fighting on their behalf. One of the big initiatives that I was working on was the cancel rent movement. We got local activists in New Jersey got cancel rent New Jersey to trend on the day of action that we had not that long ago. Because yeah, look, I'm fine. I have a place to stay. I'm not gonna go hungry. But I'm engaged in mutual aid groups that every single day are worried about if people have enough to eat, if people are okay, if people are having to deal with a landlord who's going to kick them out. Here in New Jersey, we've imposed a moratorium on evictions, and people DM me every single day telling me that their landlord is hitting them up for rent, that is telling them like they're going to get evicted and need help. And so honestly, in Corona, honestly, I consider myself very lucky. And what I'm doing to stay sane is lending my help, lending my voice, lending this congressional candidacy and the platform that I have to the people who really need help and who are not as well off as I may be.
So something that some of the other candidates I've talked to have mentioned is that their campaigns have sort of shifted to doing wellness checks just on people in the community. Is that something you would consider doing, or have you done that, or?
Not direct home wellness checks, but one of the local councilmen in Jersey City had a letter writing initiative where, we know that senior citizens are at high risk and that they're basically stuck where they are. So we had an initiative where we would write letters to senior citizens in Jersey City to, let them know that we're still thinking about them, that we care about what's going on with them. And so no, I haven't done direct wellness checks other than like with my friends and family, but I definitely have been doing little bits of outreach here and there to make sure that people are okay, because it does it's been rough for a lot of people, even people involved with my campaign, even my own family. So I understand that this has been a really rough time for a lot of different people, and I absolutely am engaged in making sure that people are okay. And I always tell people, I put in every email, if there's anything I can do to help you, please don't hesitate to reach out. I give everybody my phone number, and I'm okay. So I'm definitely willing to use whatever resources I have to check in on those who need more.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's sort of not sort of. It's a crazy time to be alive. I feel like maybe you can relate to this, but as millennials, we sort of we're sort of baptized in the post recession or the post subprime economy, and then
Absolutely.
we had now we have this. Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel? I guess.
Absolutely, I do. Absolutely, I do. So yeah, I lived through. So I was born in '88, right? So in my lifetime was the
Me
fall of the
too.
Soviet Union.
When?
Oh,
Yeah,
sick,
August.
sick. January. Nice. So in our lifetimes was the fall of the Soviet Union, 9/11, the '08 crash. If you want to call the dot-com crash before that. Now we're living through a global pandemic, the likes of which the world hasn't seen in 100 years. We're living through unemployment numbers that exceed the Great Depression. We're now living through the longest war in American history. The light at the end of the tunnel is that what I see is the rise of a new progressive era. 100 years ago, there was a progressive era that brought in labor rights, brought in women's rights, brought in a lot of different issues that people might have thought were absurd or did not jive with the times. I really do see Trump being the bookend to the end of an era that probably, I mean, some people like to say it started with Reagan, but went back to Jimmy Carter, even probably before that to LBJ. This neoliberal era is coming to an end. An animal in death throes looks very lively. Animals at the brink of death can give off signs to appear like they're very much alive, but are just thrashing with the last bits of energy that they have. And that's what I see happening to this system that is immensely corrupt, that has absolutely no popular support, and that is about to come to a crashing halt. And yes, Joe Biden is clearly not like the bannerman of a new era, but I see him as maybe the first step outside of a very evil, racist, disgusting system that has put working class people under its boot for a very long time. And Joe Biden won't be the bannerman. People like me, people like AOC, the squad, those of us who can step up and take the slings and arrows of those who don't see the future. Something I tell people is don't be afraid of the future. The future is coming whether you like it or not. And let us lead you into a brighter, more prosperous future. We're never going to go backwards. And I think for this whole corona conversation, that's probably the best way we can couch this, is that everybody's talking about, oh, when are things going to go back to normal? When are things going to go back to normal? When can I go outside? I'm really telling people, like, there is no back to normal. Things are only going to go forward from here. We are not going back to the world as it previously existed. And the sooner people can get accustomed to that idea, the better off we're all going to be. At the beginning of the automobile era, Donald Trump is like the person saying, we're going to bring back the horse and buggy. Like the horse and carriage is totally coming back. And people like me, people like the squad, AOC, Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, we're saying the automobile is here to stay. And if anything, it's going to change even more. So don't be afraid of what the future holds.
So I do want to talk about that just a little bit
Sure.
because there's a lot to unpack here, and I think you make a lot of really good points, and I really want to sort of get into a little more depth in some of them. So you mentioned that neoliberalism is in its death throes, and I could not agree more with that, because if we look at the way that the global economy, I mean, the global economy, basically the model is resource-rich nations are disempowered for raw materials to produce goods in developing nations with really poor labor standards to be bought by disempowered labor in wealthier nations with a lot of rich people, all for the benefit of global capital. And
Sounds
so
like you've read a lot of econ.
that's the pattern that we see
Yeah.
play out time and again.
Yeah.
And that economy has been billed to us as, oh, it's the future, it's more efficient, there's less redundancy. And today we're seeing the result of that of that lack of redundancy in the fact that when the world's largest manufacturer of ventilators is the first country hit by a novel coronavirus, within months the rest of the world is scrambling to amp up production. And in order to deal with what has quickly become a global pandemic,
Yeah.
that is obviously not sustainable. Even in the relief packages that we have seen, there is discussion about creating redundancy. So it does seem like some manufacturing, to some extent, of necessary things is going to come back. Now, that might not be enough. The next crisis that hits might not be a virus. It might be climate change. I mean, this is probably a pretty good indicator of what's going to happen with climate change, because we don't like to address things unless they're right at our door and saying, it's here. But it does seem like that economy is not sustainable. And in a weird way, Trump did something about trade, but his trade package is just a more rapacious version of what already exists. And he was attacked for being too hard on China, despite that. So how do you, as a progressive, get through an agenda that is sort of what does the modern economy look like, or the economy of the future to you? What does that look like, and how do you get it done?
I mean, that is a really good question, right? And like the simple answer is like, I really don't know, right? I can tell you what it should look like, and it's more democratic, it's more distributed, it's a lot less polar, right? We are living in this polar world of like power centers that basically do exactly what you described with resources. And what we're going to have to do is something that has never been done in the history of the world, and it's just like essentially like cede power to other places that have been disempowered, and let them decide the course of their own future, which is democratic at its heart, but is very counterintuitive to the way that we do things, right? The American foreign policy infrastructure spent a good 60 to 70 years murdering people who tried to do just that, right? And we're going to have to reckon with the fact that this legacy of overthrowing governments for resources, this legacy of multinational corporations invading countries for the things that we want to buy, that's not a system that can survive, because we're watching it grind to a halt right in front of us. And yeah, look, we as a society, as a species, are not good at getting out ahead of problems. It has to be right in front of your face before we as a society decide to do something about it. That's exactly what happened with Corona. And maybe this is the crisis that shifts our perspective on how we deal with global crises, because this crisis, more than anything, is something that could have led to a better international system where people recognize something like a virus doesn't respect borders. It clearly doesn't care where we draw these lines. So we could have built a better international system where we decide that certain things are best handled as a council, as a community. I read a lot of philosophy, so like I do a lot of like thinking about the state of nature. I don't know if that means anything to you, but like
no, it does. It does.
so the governments of the world are in the state of nature, and they're still living in this world of the strong abuse the weak. And that in a lot of ways, we're still a Stone Age society. We're still a Stone Age species where the strong abuse the weak. We take what we want and we tell them that that's just the way things are. But like, we have to evolve as a people, as a society, as a species, and come to the realization that like Benjamin Franklin said, we're either gonna all hang together or we will certainly hang separately, and that is what will happen.
You know, it's interesting. I'm glad that you brought up maybe a stronger international system, because because neoliberalism in many ways sort of spawned out of the post World War II power vacuum, and as a way of preventing future world wars. Because right, if the United States is a strong global power, then a Nazi Germany will never again rise. And obviously, what ended up happening is that we became very much similar to the thing that we wanted to prevent, which was a hegemonic power that imposed itself on other weaker, militarily weaker nations. And did you? So you went to law school. Did you ever study international law?
I didn't. I was really focused. I've always been focused more inwardly to the United States. So I spent a lot of my time, and economics has always been like a big topic for me. So I spend a lot of my time really focusing on corporate and compliance law. But I definitely did take a course.
That was Greek to me. That stuff was I couldn't. I tried taking a tax class and I was like, I'm gonna fail.
One of the few A's I managed to muster in law school was in my tax course. Yeah, so I mean, it's always been a thing for me. But I definitely did take a course on, like, I think it was national security law, which is at its very core, how does this nation interact with other nations? Although it's always in a pretty violent fashion, I guess that's the extent to my knowledge on like international law.
So the reason that I asked was because basically international law is sort of made up, and it's only as strong as as everybody's willing to allow it to be, which is really not all that strong.
Yeah.
But would you like to see greater enforcement in, say, the International Criminal Court, because right now we have the Hague Invasion Act, where the United States will not let Americans get tried for war crimes before an international tribunal. Do you think that we should that would be a way of maybe ceding some of that power that we talked about very briefly? Is holding ourselves.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I always understand that people are going to want to have some degree of sovereignty, right? We're not just going to all meld into one super state, and I completely understand that. But the simple fact of the matter is that we accept government as a necessary evil, because eventually one person is going to try to abuse another person, and we need a set of rules for how we deal with those sorts of interactions. And we need to bring that to the governmental level and have a determination of what is going to happen when one government abuses another government. And so, yeah, we do have to, in some way, find a system. Obviously there are critiques of the UN. It's a pretty corrupt and like bureaucratic system that people don't have a lot of like faith in. But we have to come up with a system that honestly brings forward the fact that most of the struggles that we're going to face in the 21st century are international problems, are regional problems, are not issues of one nation state. Climate change being probably the best one. Like, climate will not respect international borders, and the solutions are not going to be driven by any one nation. And of course, right wingers always like to say, well, what about India and China always polluting everything? And it's just like, pointing the finger doesn't get us anywhere. What we have to do is come up with a system that everybody agrees to. It's almost like the nations of the world are cavemen wandering around in the state of nature, and we have to find a way to bring them together and say, listen, we need a system to govern how we interact with each other, because what we've been doing clearly is not working and is probably going to lead to the death and destruction of our planet if we continue on this path. So yeah, I'm kind of like, that's like the $1 million question, is like, how do we solve all this stuff? And like, I wish I had the answers,
Right.
but like we have to move in a direction of greater international unity, or some sort of international system that recognizes that the problems that we face don't respect national borders. So like, as a career, I do anti-money laundering. Money is laundered across borders. And so like, people understand that this is not an issue that is localized to one country. One of the big things that I fight against is like the fact that the global oligarchs are hiding somewhere between 21 and $32 trillion in offshore shell companies in places like Cyprus, Panama, the British Virgin Islands. This is going to require an international solution. The issue of taxation of the world's billionaires, this is going to require an international solution. No one because when you have country by country solutions, what you have is places like Ireland that set the rate to 0 and everybody floods there, and then the problem doesn't get solved.
Yeah, it does create sort of forum shopping, I guess, or tax law shopping. Um, so So I want to move off the sort of because obviously it's unfair to ask you about how are you going to solve the world? How are you going to create a greater unity on planet Earth when it's a little unfair to ask you. I'm glad that you have ideas, and this is a safe space. So I wanted to ask you about you mentioned that you see that one of the reasons that you were running is that you see these high rises that people can't afford, that you can't afford, even working as a lawyer. And having done some reporting on homelessness in New York City, I wanted to sort of pick your brain about that before I let you go,
Sure.
because I would be remiss if I didn't. So how do we address it? First of all, what are the problems? What do you see as sort of contributing problems to homelessness and housing insecurity? And then how do we address that? And as a federal representative, how would you address that nationally?
Thanks. Like that's honestly like one of my favorite questions, because like there's a reason that the first policy plank that we released was our affordable housing policy. It's something that is like deeply like known to be a problem, specifically in this part of the country, here in New Jersey, in New York City. It's a huge problem. And the answer that we often get from people who are skeptics is like, well, that's a local issue. Like you can't change what people are going to charge for rent. And they're technically, at some point, they're right? Like, I'm not going to tell landlords what they can charge for rent. But what we absolutely can do is implement policy that affects the housing market as a whole. So probably not going to surprise you, but like the answer that I give as to like why this is such a problem is corruption. Why is there so much housing insecurity? Well, you have people like Jared Kushner, who owns a building here in the district in Jersey City. They will get these very lucrative tax abatements, right? So they're getting corporate welfare handouts from the government to put up high rises that nobody in the district can afford. There was recently a piece I read that said that a significant chunk of these units sit vacant, right? So like nobody's paying rent on them. They're literally just sitting vacant, and the developer literally does not care because their payout was built in through their tax abatements. So we can get rid of these tax abatements by charging these high-end developers a tax equal to the abatement that they would get, right? So zeroing out, we're supposed to live in a capitalist country, right? You're taking a risk on putting this capital up. If you can't make a profit off of it, that's not the taxpayer's problem. That's more your problem. And you should have invested your money somewhere smarter, probably, right? That's one thing. The other thing is that you have a lot of international cartels and money laundering rings who love the real estate market. Why is Trump known for real estate, right? Because you get all these dodgy Russians who come in, who spend a lot of money because they're trying to wash money that they can't use in their local country. So they'll bring it over to the United States. They'll act like they're some sort of like businessman in their home country. They don't ask for what we call KYC, which is know your customer, for which basically backs up where you got all this money from. And again, they are draining the housing stock. So this is the other problem, is that people are illegitimately draining the housing stock using this illegal money in their home country, or having these units sit vacant. And so it's supply and demand, right? And if you're cutting off a certain supply of these units, so how do we combat that? My housing policy has a vacancy tax. So if you're going to let these units sit vacant and nobody is using them, we're going to charge you a tax on that, because you're draining from the housing stock of our district.
Favorite words. My favorite. Yeah, I mean, this is exactly sort of what my reporting sort of dealt with, is that we have in New York City, there's about, I think, 87,000 units that are just vacant.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of that are like these luxury buildings that maybe include 1 or 2 units of affordable housing, affordable units. And then the whole neighborhood is ruined, and only those two units in that building will be, that's the affordable housing now in the entire neighborhood. So
yeah, and honestly, it's just like it's like, where do you start off from? Like, if you start from a vector of like housing is this for-profit mechanism, it's going to take you a different direction than if you view housing as a human right that every human being should have in our world, because we're a supposedly civilized nation. So if you start from the vector that every single human deserves a place to live and a dignified living, like, that takes you a whole different place from viewing housing as a purely for market commoditization of how people live.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time, and thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for being so friggin' optimistic. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I hope that we can do this again before your primary, which again is on July 7th. Tell everybody where they can find you, and more information and where they can donate.
So Walker, thank you so much. It's like been a pleasure. I really appreciate you reaching out to me today. You can see I'm not like one of these like old timey politicians. Like, if you send me a DM, I promise I'll respond. And that's
It's
really
true,
the way
he
I carry
did.
myself.
He did. I messaged him today.
I'm a man of the people, man. I'm a man of the people, dude. Like, I'm just like one of you. Like, I'm not like this system. So anybody who heard this and likes what they heard and is interested in getting involved, you can find me at oseguera2020.com. That's my last name, oseguera2020.com. The same handle on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I don't do TikTok because I'm not 18, but plus I don't think I'm that entertaining as a performer. But I definitely, like, I'm just like one of you. Like, I'm sick of seeing what the political establishment has done to my hometown. And I know that it's a story that's replicated all over the country, in every city and state across the country. And I just got sick of it, and I wanted to do something about it. So if anybody is interested, we have phone banking shifts every single day. If you want to donate, you can go to my website. We have a contribute button. Please check me out. You can read about me in The Intercept. You can read about me in the Jersey Journal. We just got Marianne Williamson's endorsement just yesterday. So we are really pushing hard. You say I'm optimistic. I would call myself realistic. And I just really see a light at the end of the tunnel. I really believe that this horrendous, disgusting system that literally nobody likes is about to die. And I want to be there to build something much more beautiful on top of it. And I hope that all of you are willing to join me in that journey and are willing to make a contribution to making this world a better place, not for me, but for all generations that come after us.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with me. And everybody watching, if you like this interview. I'm trying to do more of these. Candidates, please reach out. Um, yeah, and if you have a candidate that inspires you, send me a message. My DMs are always open too. Um, and yeah, take care. All right, let me